Okay, I'm going to show you how to make a little ladybug bead. We're going to be making 2 beads together on the mandrel. Pairs of beads are great for Beads of Courage Carry a Bead program, and we just like to send 2 matched beads. So we're going to be using an opaque, I'm using periwinkle, a pulled black stringer, and a pulled white stringer. In terms of tools, there's really only 2 things you'll need. Something with a sharp edge to make the groove between the ladybug's wings on its back. This is one of Corina's magic wands, but anything will do. And also a Marvering Pad. I have a brass piece which is sitting on top of a candlestick holder that I got at a craft shop. It gives it a nice height above your workbench because we're going to be marvering into cones, and so you have room to move the mandrel down and have a bit of clearance. Okay, let's get started. Safety first. When you light your torch, if you're using a lighter like I am, make sure you store it someplace safe, away from flying hot glass, as they can explode. Mine's kept in a drawer. For Beads of Courage, you want to use a thicker mandrel so the kids have an easier time stringing their beads. You want to ensure that you have your bead release long enough along the mandrel so that you have room to make 2 beads with some separation in between them so that they don't get overheated and melt together. Okay, so I will be making 2 cones on the mandrel. The narrower part of the cone will be on the outside and the wider part will be on the inside. So I'm going to wind down my glass and get a rough shaping of my first one, and then I will start on the second one. The nice thing about making 2 at once on the mandrel is that it's easier to get them to match. I'm just getting the base glass on here. They don't need to be too big. In fact, you don't want them so big that they can't fit. There are information sheets on the Beads of Courage website about the Carry a Bead program. All right, that's probably enough glass for the first one, so let me get a bit of heat into it and shape it into a cone. Again, I want the narrow part of the cone on the outside because that's where I'll be adding the black and the details for the head of the ladybug. So I want that to be a little bit thinner, and the part towards the middle will be the broader part of its wing, so that can be a little bit thicker. The reason I'm putting the details on the outside is they won't get quite as much heat as you do get in the center of the mandrel. So it's easier to control the details that way. I'm going to wind on my second ladybug body. Try to match it to the first one as closely as I can. So when I'm winding on, I have my glass rod more or less perpendicular to the mandrel. The mandrel is a little bit below the flame. I've preheated it. That helps you prevent bubbles forming. Sometimes your bead release can outgas a bit, and that causes bubbles, and they're kind of a pain to clean out the bead release from. So it's easier to prevent them. You'll notice every now and then I'm going to flash the bead I haven't been working on into the heat just to keep it warm. This is the part where if you're a more experienced bead maker, you sort of develop a feel for how long you can go between warming up a part that isn't in the flame. If you're a beginner, of course, you can make these one at a time. But sometimes it's easier if you have 2 on the mandrel at the same time to get them to match. So I'm going to marver the right ladybug. And I'm trying to have the same footprint between the right and the left, and the same diameter and angle. Sometimes it's convenient to use a shaping tool in between the beads if you want to clean up those edges. You can't exactly get in there with the marver once you have 2 on the mandrel. So these are fairly close matched in size, so we're going to go with that. So the next step is to add the head of the ladybug. Okay, so the head is going to go on the thinner part of the cone, and I'm just going to use my black opaque glass, and I'm going to wind on a ring on both ends and then carefully melt it down. I want it to stay raised a little bit, so I don't want to melt it into the full conical profile. I'm going to start by just adding a thick ring. And I give that a little bit of heat and let that melt down. While that's melting in a bit, I'm going to tend to the bead on the right. I heat it up a little gather, and I'm going to add my black ring on the right side at the pointy end of the cone. Add a little bit more heat to the one on the right so it can begin to melt in. Go back to the left side. Now I want this black to flow down and encase the periwinkle. Add another little bit of a ring, and if you notice, I'm kind of heating it from the end. That way the glass will flow towards the mandrel. And now on the right side, I'm going to add a little bit more glass. I'm adding it towards the edge. I am not touching the mandrel with the glass. I want it to just flow down towards the mandrel on its own. It makes for a nicer bead hole. I've got my mandrel angled so that the flame is hitting the point of that cone and heating up the black. And you'll see the glass will just naturally flow towards the mandrel, and that'll give you a nice puckered end. We don't want sharp edges to our beads for beads of courage. You don't want them anywhere, anytime. I'm going to add a little bit of insurance heat to the wide part of the cone. I think I've got enough black in there. At this point, if you want to clean up your cone a little bit and marver it, you can do that on the edge of your magic wand or a stump shaper or whatever type of marvering pad you might have. It's nice having the sharp edge of the wand here because that helps you keep the definition of the head part for the ladybug. Okay, so the next part is to put the grooves in on the back, which are going to define the two sides of the wings. So you need to decide where the eyes are going to be, what's the top and what's the bottom. And I'm going to pick this side right here, and you're going to heat it up down the back till it's glowing, and then use the sharp edge of the wand and parallel to the mandrel, just make an indentation. And so on the right bead, we're going to do the same thing. Let's get a bit of extra heat in here. Decide where we're going to make this groove, and with the sharp edge, press in right in line with the mandrel. And that will create the definition for the two sides of the wing down the ladybug's back. A little bit of insurance heat to the black, to the head. Okay, next up we want to add some dots, little spots down the back of the ladybug. Since this one is in periwinkle, it's sort of an artistic ladybug. You can make it out of red. The red and the black look the same in the flame, so that isn't the best color to demonstrate. But kids like fantasy bugs and critters, so it will be a periwinkle blue ladybug. So I'm just adding a bunch of dots to the back on both sides, just to add a little bit of detail and accents. You can put as many or as few as you like, bigger or smaller. We want to melt those in smooth. So I'm heating one side, and then I'm going to the other bug and heating that side while the first side cools a little bit. You may need to, at this point, go in and clean up that little detail in that separation between the two wings, depending on how much you melted it. You can add a little groove in there to accentuate that a little bit. The last stop is adding the eyes. So we're going to put 2 white dots on either side of the groove for the wing split, and 2 white dots on the other ladybug. I like to flatten them out a little bit with my magic wand. At this point, you can judge the size of them and add a little bit more glass if you need it to one or the other so that they match. These look like they came out okay. And then we're going to take a thin stringer and add a few dots for the pupils. 1, 2, 3, 4. When I add those dots, I only have the end of the stringer hot, and then I touch it down on the white. And since the white dot was already warmed up, it sticks pretty well. And I go in afterwards and melt the dot in. At this point, you can also scooch them a little bit one way or the other so that your ladybugs aren't cross-eyed. Okay, I'm going to add a little bit of insurance heat to the underside, a little bit in between. I'm going to heat up the mandrel in front of the mouths on both sides of the ladybugs. It'll help prevent cracking and chipping around the bead holes when you go to take them off the mandrel and clean out the bead release later. But there you have it. 2 little periwinkle ladybugs ready to go in the kiln. Thanks for watching.
Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed one of these Lampwork bead tutorials. Be sure to check out the full playlist to see all of the different Lampwork tutorials we have, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button so that way you can look back at them later and catch up on any new videos that come out in the future. Thanks!